MBA hopefuls. We're on the air with MBA Waves, your weekly broadcast talking about all things business and education, streaming live every Tuesday. We bring you tons of tips to help you get into the top-ranked MBA programs and get you up close and personal with many of the business schools that we host on the show, as well as professionals in the field where you can get all of your questions answered. I'm your host for today, Bara Sapir, and I'm joined by my co-host, Krithika of Career Labs. Krithika, how are you doing?
Amazing, thanks.
Awesome. And folks who are joining us today, if you like this week's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Today on episode 120, we are talking about slaying the dragon of imposter syndrome with Megan. Megan, tell me if I'm saying your name correctly. Your last name, Stiphany?
Stiphany, like Gwen, but
Stiphany,
not as cool.
Like Gwen. Well, I don't know. You're pretty damn cool. So Megan Stiphany, who's the founder of Stiphany Consulting,
Right.
And a huge welcome to you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So let's just tell us, like, in just a few words, a little bit about your background,
Sure.
and where you come from and what you're up to.
Happy to. So worked at Notre Dame as the Director of Student Services for grad business programs for about 7 years. Following that, worked at Chicago Booth. I was one of the directors of admission in their full-time MBA program and did a lot of travel around the world, met a lot of really great candidates, and discovered, that I wanted to do some more admissions work, but moved over to the boarding school world. So I did admissions for a boarding school in Northwest Indiana, and then I started doing consulting for MBA, and I've been doing it since 2017. Added on college, added on boarding schools, and so I'm kind of doing all the verticals at once, and loving it. Living in Charlotte, North Carolina, with my family, and again, just really happy to be here to talk about this important topic.
It's a really important topic, and it's super interesting, and it also, it kind of affects. It seems like it affects everybody, right? Like imposter syndrome seems to come up. I'm curious, even if, like, maybe we'll talk about it later. Like, does it affect women more than men, or is there like different age groups? I mean, we can talk about that later, because first I want to really dig in and ask you, like, well, what is imposter syndrome? Can you define it for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. It is awful. To me, I just think about it as the feeling that your success isn't deserved and it's not earned. So it's when you're sort of waiting for folks to show up and discover you, that you don't belong here. You don't know what you say you know. They tell you that you don't deserve a seat at the table that you're already sitting at. So it's this deep-seated self-doubt. And that's how I think about imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's comprehensive. And it's debilitating, I'd imagine. Mm-hmm. So why then is it so important for us to talk about MBA Waves, to talk about imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think it's important. I'm seeing so much more of it, the longer that I work in this industry. And I think, of course, it has to do with sort of what's going on, culturally, societally. But, it's important because we have an inherent need as human beings to fit in and to be seen and to be appreciated for who we are and what we bring to the table. So, these feelings of imposter syndrome, they're very real. And as you said, they can be debilitating. And I think there's a tendency maybe to ignore them or dismiss them as, just being stressed or feeling anxiety. But I think that really can only compound the issue. And ultimately, it'll end up sabotaging, everything you're working towards, including, of course, a successful business school application. The second reason I think it's important to talk about is because just in general, we have to take care of ourselves to be at our best. And I think, hopefully we can talk about this later, but it's a lesson I learned really late in life. So I'm on this mission to spread the word about really taking care of yourself. We're exposed to so much information 24/7 right now, and layering a business school application and GMAT test taking or GRE test taking on top of everything that is going on in your life as a candidate is tough for anyone. But if you're suffering from imposter syndrome on top of that, and you're not taking steps to take care of yourself in that process, I really think there's just no possible way to produce an outstanding and compelling application for business school.
It feels, the way that you're describing it, is like you're moving through oncoming traffic, right?
Yes.
Like, it's like GMAT.
Yeah.
application,
Yes.
interview, and like it's like this oncoming traffic constantly. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's got to be exhausting for anyone going through a business school application with this deep-seated imposter syndrome.
I'd agree.
And what comes to mind is it's typically very common among high achievers. And the business school is tell me about like finding high achievers in every nook and corner in every part of the realm or any field that you can imagine.
Right.
So I was curious about the different types of imposter syndrome, like perfectionist, a superhuman, an expert, or a soloist.
Right.
Can you unpack these for us?
Yeah, happy to. And I'm happy to say that I've been most of these at some point in my life, for sure. I think folks, as you mentioned, are who are sort of type A can fall into this pretty easily. So perfectionist. This is someone who's the micromanager. They're obsessive. They have just incredible expectations for themselves. And they have a really deep fear of making any kind of mistake. So a lot of times they get stuck and they can't get off center. So they're stuck, so afraid to make a mistake that they just don't do anything. A superhuman is unlike the perfectionist in that they are just constantly trying to do more and more and more, no matter what the repercussions are, to their sleep, to their health, their mental health. They feel this need to get as much knowledge as they can in order to, compensate for the feelings of insecurity that they have. Then you have the natural genius. So this is the person who, and I'm sure we all know someone like this, who just crushed it in high school and then maybe went on to a competitive college and assumed they had the whole thing in the bag because they were so, successful in their high school experience. Then they realized that they were surrounded by all of the rest of the brilliant people out there who applied to that school and got in. All of them were at the top of their class. So now they're kind of buckling as they compare themselves constantly to these other folks. The soloist, this is, oh my gosh, this is like, I feel seen. The soloist is a person who functions as an island, seeing themselves as weak if they ask for help. And so that ends up, of course, leading to isolation, which then leads to tremendous overwhelm. And then finally, the expert. So despite knowing a lot of information. So think about a PhD or someone who has a master's degree in a specific area. They know, they're an expert. They know a lot of information in a particular area, but somehow they still feel that it's never enough. And so they're always, afraid that they're going to be found out as a fraud. And so they're still kind of constantly seeking that information. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
I gotta admit that, some of these are so familiar when I was in grad school. I didn't know the terms then.
Yeah. It's funny to put a name to it now, right? When I look at this list, I'm like, oh yeah, that was me in my 20s.
Yeah, it's also reminding me, we were talking about University of Michigan earlier, when I started the graduate program there, and I want to say that they accepted like 12 people into the program. It was each class was really small. And the people that I was surrounded by were so brilliant. And I was like, what? Like, how did I get here? But then I think probably, when we talk about a little later about like, how do you get over it? You start to just champion your own brilliance and whatever that particular brilliance is.
Yes.
And because I was surrounded by people that I was like, it was at the onset of having computers, like, but they were like human computers and how they were able to like, and I was like, I'm not that person.
Yes.
What am I doing here? And then over time, I realized, wow, I really add something that's different than what they have, and they don't have what I have.
Right.
No, but I just remember that feeling
right.
that you mentioned before of like,
oh
my gosh.
And they're thinking the same thing that you were thinking. Like, she has this, and I am like, what have I done in my life?
Totally.
Looking at you and your accomplishments. So it's this cycle of, insecurity and shame. It's crazy.
I know humans, we be cray, right?
We are.
So can you talk a little bit about whether in your engagement with business school, applicants if they sort of fall into any one of those categories more than other, or do you feel like it's a nice representation bouquet?
Oh gosh, I'm sure other consultants have seen, maybe a larger bouquet, but what I have seen in particular in this cycle is this combination of perfectionism and superhuman. So clients cannot make a decision and move forward. They're polling everyone in their circle. They're reaching out to their dear Aunt Sally who graduated from Booth in, whatever, the late 90s. And all of these people are becoming a part of that application process. And even still, they can't make a decision. So it's as though they've lost all connection to their inner voice and they can't seem to look in to find that answer. So to me, what I've noticed is less about procrastination and more about paralysis. And just as a side note, I mean, I have never seen so many clients sign up for round 1 applications and punt to round 2 in all the time I've done this. They get even a month out and they just can't pull the trigger on it. So it's really been a challenge.
It's really interesting the view into the process that admissions consultants and test prep people have, and people think that it's very forward in a very almost two-dimensional, oh, you just fill out your application, oh, you just write your essay. It's no, we're actually doing the deep work. And you're like this wellness evangelist in this process, right? And the way that you're describing it, and it is really important because these kinds of imposter syndromes, if you don't deal with it, I mean, I'll speak about anxiety.
Sure.
We deal with a little bit with imposter syndrome as well. Yep. They don't go away. No. It winds up showing up in the boardroom. It winds up showing up in presentations and other places.
Yes.
So it's so important that if it does rear its ugly head, that you actually address it, because it's just information for you that you just have some growth.
Right. Not good or bad, just a thing to deal with and to work on. So, yeah.
Exactly.
So maybe you talked about this a little bit about paralysis and procrastination. What other things get in the way of someone applying to business school?
Oh gosh, I mean, one of the things I've noticed is, and this is part of that paralysis is they, instead of doing the work, they're looking for information on all of the blogs and the websites, where other candidates are giving information, and they're leveraging that information as fact. And they'll come back to me and say, well, I heard on this website or on this blog, and they're spending all this time kind of going down these rabbit holes. The other thing I think gets in the way is them trying, and of course this makes sense, right? Because these are type A people who love numbers. So they're trying to run the numbers. They're like, what are my chances to get in? And it's like, listen, if I could tell you that answer, I would be so beautifully wealthy. It would just be ridiculous. I have no idea if you're going to get in because we don't know who applied, what their scores are, where they went to undergrad. The list goes on. There are all these components that go into a powerful application, but they spend a lot of time trying to analyze and understand their chances of getting in, being interviewed, getting off the wait list, et cetera, et cetera. So those are kind of some of the things that stick out to me as ways that, they block themselves from a successful application.
Yeah, that is we're our own worst enemy, right? Isn't that
totally?
Gosh. We wind up just sabotaging ourselves. And when we often talk on MBA Waves about, or I talk about it being like a dance, right? And so you want to be engaged with it, but you also want to go through the process of learning what the skills are so that you can dance and be in that flow. Right. So if imposter syndrome comes out, I guess that would be like what happens when the DJ's music totally goes off. Do you just stop dancing?
Right.
Or do you just keep moving? So can you talk a little bit about the high pressure environment like business school and some common signs or symptoms that students, even if they're not aware of this or they weren't aware in the process, like how they can just sort of know that this is going on for them?
Yeah, I think when you start to ask, should I even be doing this? Do I have any business being a part of this process. Like if there's any question about whether you should even try, to me, that's the biggest red flag, because trying is the only way you'll know. And so that for me is the, when somebody starts talking to me about whether they even belong in the race, that's when I start to kind of slow down the conversation about the application and start talking about what's going on in their heads. I think it's, feeling of dread instead of excitement when you sit down to write an essay. I would say that's probably a red flag as well, to think about whether this is the right moment or whether there's something deeper going on. Back to what I was saying about kind of going down rabbit holes online and looking for information, despite having hired an expert who's worked, in a business school, who has kind of been behind the scenes. You really just can't get to that point of, believing in yourself and your story and listening to the expert. So those are a couple of the things that off the top of my head that I can think of, that really are red flags. But that first one, to me, honestly, if you're questioning your seat at the table before you even walked into the building, it's like, okay, we've got to just time out here and really think about what this means and how we can turn this around. So
it's interesting. I'm on a listserv of IECs that are dealing with high school students. And just yesterday, I mean, it comes up a lot, but just yesterday, one of them wrote, so my student is like getting advice from her friend to rewrite all of her essays about X, and told me that we're not going to do it the way that I've told her to do it. And like, I guess I have to talk to her parents now. I mean, it's happening across the board that people go onto Reddit and for the test prep side, people say, well, this is how I need to do the question. This is how I need to answer this particular question, or this is how I need to study, because this guy that I know, he did great on the test and I'm going to follow him. I'm like, I've spent, we have collectively over 100 years of test prep in my, like probably over 200 years of test prep experience. And myself, like I've got 30 years. You're going to listen to a guy that spent 6 months, max, maybe 2. And like, he nailed it. It's kind of like the rich dad, poor dad. Like he nailed it on one thing, but that doesn't mean that you're going to nail it on one thing. It's like, who are you going into the application? Who are you going into? What are your gifts? And like leveraging your gifts and then bringing up the weakest areas, or making that for the essays moments of learning. It's so interesting at, I mean, it's just common, right? Like it's just so common that people, for some reason, what is it? Confirmation, social confirmation, I think is what people on social media, that even though they've hired, even though they've paid a money, like they've valued it to pay money, the money doesn't get you the it's the work that you do with the person that you've paid. That's what you're paying. So and
then it's just the let go. It's the belief that you have done everything that you could do. You have pulled every lever that you could pull, that all of your energy, all of the joy that you have about this process goes into just your application, and it goes nowhere else. And then you have to just, and this is easier said than done, but you just have to walk away from, those opportunities to go down these rabbit holes and to listen to folks who, aren't quite the experts maybe that you think they are.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's even interesting watching folks process. I mean, I wonder how it is for both of you. Like, how do people choose you as admissions consultants versus someone else? Because like rapport, experience. I mean, you've been at Booth. You've been at, what was the first school that you said you were?
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. Notre who? I had to say that.
I hear you. I see you.
Krithika also went to Michigan, so she yeah.
Okay.
Krithika, were you up next?
Yes. So I was just processing what you're saying, and I'm saying, like, this is like my story. And that's because I feel that it's also a Gen Z thing, where they get a lot of confirmation and validation from their peers, and they trust their peers more, and they want to see it on media. They want to see the reviews and want to get it confirmed. And I also think that you pulled out a very important point about doing research and doing like over research in terms of just like to the point where the research is not helpful, but it's more harming the process.
Right.
And now I think, like, could you share some personal experience with syndrome during your time at grad school, business school, and what you've seen as well, and
Yeah.
how it impacted you or some of the others with whom you worked with?
Definitely. Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's, I mentioned this earlier. It's something that I've struggled with for a long time. And as I said, I've been just about every imposter on my journey. So, for a long time, I thought I had to do everything on my own, and that asking for help made me weak. And this was true, not just in my professional life. It was true, in my early journey of motherhood. It was true, it's been true in multiple aspects of my life, that asking for help and saying, I don't know the answer, made me weak. And so I did a lot of isolation. And of course, that leads to overwhelm when you don't ask for help. And there are many people around you who are more than happy to help and more than happy to be a part of your team to lift you up. There were times, of course, when I was doing my own MBA, I felt like, gosh, I'm not smart enough to be in this group, to your point, Bara, earlier about, Michigan and that program, right? It's like, I'm in this group and I feel like everyone there is just thinking, oh, we have the dud of the group. So, I've been stuck at times in my life to make a move. I was too scared to make a mistake. And honestly, I think, the impact on me throughout that process was twofold. It was really, first, that I wasn't able to form the powerful relationships that I think I can now, because I didn't trust the people around me to accept me, to love me, to care for me, to teach me, in those moments. And so because I didn't extend that trust, I didn't have the relationship sort of in return. Second, I think I did my own mental health a huge disservice, because I listened to a lot of noise. I listened to a lot of negativity coming from the inside. And instead of spending time finding joy in all the things that I was doing, I was really listening to more noise than anything. And so, those are some of the sort of examples. I think one of the main turning points, and I'll give Booth credit for this, is they really think a lot about making mistakes and how powerful those mistakes are and can be in the evolution of a really good idea. And I think, Booth is certainly not the only school in the world who thinks this way, but I didn't really understand this until I got there and started iterating on programs and processes and things that we were doing. And I realized, like, the best ideas do have multiple fingerprints, which is one of their sayings. And also, these iterations make it better. They make it more powerful. They make it more interesting. And so that's the whole point. And so that's some of how I experienced imposter syndrome. And, it's still a little bit of a work in process, to be completely honest. There are still moments when it creeps up for me. And that's just real. So it's okay.
Yeah. I think the more human, like the more vulnerable we are, the more human we are, and people can relate to it. I mean, I think being human means that you have those moments where you question yourself, and then it's that digging in and bringing yourself to that next level. Like, well, like, I could feel that way, but look at all these examples of ways that I'm not an imposter. Look at all this accomplishment. Look at all, like, and really kind of reframing it that actually bolsters you up, right?
Yes.
Like, so it's kind of like the compost that's actually giving nutrients to the soil. And
that's good.
Right?
I like that.
Yeah. Because I mean, that makes the plant more nourished, more healthy, more delicious for eating it. Are there other ways that you would recommend to beat imposter syndrome, or at least to engage with it in a positive way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, there's some really basic things that I think from a high level that folks can do to take care of themselves. And it's, this is really simple, but it's like, get enough sleep, eat healthily, move your body, do some meditation. I mean, these are all things that, if you would have told me to do all this when I was in my 30s, I would have been like, please. But it's true, because I think it's all connected. Like see a therapist, journal, commit to doing something that makes you feel happy every day, get some fresh air and some sunshine. I mean, do a lot of these things that, make you feel good in your body, because it connects to your mind, and the better you feel inside, the better product you're going to put out in terms of a candidacy for business school. And that may sound really like woo woo and not real, but it is real. I mean, I've worked with a lot of clients over the years, as a consultant for MBA school, 6 years. And so, before that at Booth, I mean, I've read thousands and thousands of applications. I can tell when someone has their mental and their physical health together, and they are able to be vulnerable and honest in the application process. So those are some of the things that I think are important. The other thing is you've got to surround yourself with really good people. And, there was a point in my life when I really noticed a pattern, and I noticed that the more I surrounded myself with people who weren't uplifting, who were more focused on talking about other people versus big ideas, I noticed that in my brain, I just had a lot of negativity, and it was taking up a lot of space. So I learned to say no to people who didn't fill my cup, who didn't think about it and want to talk about big ideas, who were more focused on pulling me down as opposed to, being a champion for me and for my success. And it has changed everything in my life. So I notice now that the sort of voices in my head who are telling me that I can't do something are pretty much gone. And when I need some support, again, going back to surrounding myself with great people, they're there to remind me in some of those moments who I am and what I'm about. And then it's pretty easy to kind of bounce back. So I think those are the kind of main things: is take care of yourself physically, mentally, and make sure you've got the best people on your team that you can.
Yeah, the people that are intimates really are our mirrors, right?
Yes.
And so having I think that's so important, surrounding ourselves. And it was hard during COVID, right? Like, how did we surround ourselves with people to lift us up when we were really just like this right now? I mean,
Right.
and this is a miracle. Like, we're all like in different areas and we're able to have a fluid conversation.
Right.
But in COVID, when there was, I know that for me, I didn't meet as many people during COVID as I did. Or I met them in different ways, and then I met them in person. It was like, wow, you're so much taller.
Yes.
When I met Eric, who unfortunately isn't joining us today, we miss him.
Yeah.
But Eric is much taller than my 5-foot stature, and I was like, I warned him ahead of time. There was something else I wanted to bring up, is that I feel that all of the things you're talking about are really good life skills, like the meditation, the yoga, smelling the roses. And we take it a little bit further, and I'm just going to put it out there. Like, we do hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, tapping, different holistic modalities that will very quickly get you out of your own way.
Yep.
And so whoever is listening to this, like, find practitioners and try out different things like craniosacral. Maybe you want to get a chiropractic adjustment. Maybe you want to just go for a walk. Or maybe, there's apps like Calm and Headspace, and there's even apps for therapy, right? So find out if your health insurance has some kind of provision to help you get out of it's just a track, right? Like, you've just set yourself up in a track, and you just have to get onto another track, and then the neural pathways will shift.
Yeah.
And so if it's outside of you, it's people, but if it's inside of you, right, it's the inner game. You want to just make that shift. And if you see that it's there's so many technologies that you can use that are tried and true.
I think that's so right. Yep. I think that's so right. And I think, a lot of people will hear, all of the candidates out there who have talked to business schools. I'm sure their adcoms have said to you, we look at your application from a holistic perspective, right? That's a very kind of key MBA world phrase. And that, whether that's true or not isn't relevant. Look at yourself from a holistic perspective. What are all of the components of you that need to be nourished and fed and taken care of? And that's why I love working, with you all so much, because you don't just think about test prep. It's so much bigger than that. And there's so much more that goes into a successful application than, just completing some essays and an application. It's much deeper.
It's transformational.
It's totally transformational. I like to think of B School just being like a trailer for the leadership journey later on.
Hmm.
And from what you said, Meg, I think that if some of these problems are not addressed in B School, which is a safer space, it's going to carry on throughout the career and show up in even tougher situations for candidates.
Yes.
So changing that self-talk, through the mechanisms that you said,
Yep.
is going to be so key. And as consultants, and I think if we know that some of the applicants are possibly having this or
Hmm.
undergoing this, that's where we come in and see how this can be prevented so that they can have a successful application, but most importantly, a successful business school journey later on.
Agree. I mean, once you get it, and we talked about this for college, but I mean, at the business school level, I mean, you think about the percentage of people who take the GMAT, actually get into school. These are the top of the top of the top of folks who are out there. If your imposter syndrome is warm during the application process, it's going to be an inferno when you're at Booth or at Harvard or at Notre Dame or Michigan or whatever business school you join. I mean, you're going to be surrounded by incredible people, and having some level of control, or even just acknowledging it and knowing it's there, and knowing having some tools in your toolkit to be able to manage it, is going to be paramount to your success. To your point, Krithika, once you're actually in the program.
What are some
Yeah.
resources in the programs? Like when you look at Booth and Notre Dame, like it was a while ago, but what kind of support did they have?
It's interesting. I would say they screen for people who don't come into the program with a high level of emotional intelligence. So they're not looking for any level of perfection. In fact, they want people to have grit and resilience, and to have gone through tough moments in their life, but they want to know that you can survive it and sort of pick yourself up and dust yourself off and keep going. Because business school will do that to you really fast. Like any graduate program is going to knock you down hard. If you can't get up, now you're hurting their numbers, and now they're mad about that, right? Like they don't want to take a risk on someone who they already can identify has a low level of emotional intelligence just in the app process. So, I think do institutions have mental health support? Sure. They definitely have that. There are a lot of particularly after COVID, there are a lot of institutions who really, beefed up that level of care. But ultimately they expect business school candidates to come pretty fully formed and have a handle on what they need to be successful and to survive well within the program. I think one of the things that I think they do have, all business schools have this, is a director of student services. And that's a role that I used to love and hold. I was there at Notre Dame for almost 7 years doing this. And I was definitely the person who, talked folks off the ledge and reminded them that they belong and they should be in the program. So, for all of our listeners out there, make sure you make really good friends with the director of student services, because that person's not just going to help you figure out which classes to take, but when you have a moment of just wanting to run, screaming into the night, they're going to rein you back in. So, so that's definitely a resource. And then finally, I'll say the community. I mean, you've got to get on campus, get to know that community, because those are your people, and you'll feel it really quickly once you get onto campus. And that community is really what's going to sustain you. It's going to, lift you up. This goes back to surrounding yourself with the right people. It's going to lift you up when you're feeling like you don't belong or you can't do the work. They're going to help you when you ask for help, of course. So it's kind of all those things that, together that help kind of combat imposter syndrome. But knowing yourself, having some tools in the toolkit, early on, those are all things that'll help make you a successful candidate in the process.
I want to mention one more thing, which is
Sure.
the four-legged creature that you have behind you that I saw, that kitty. No, that's actually, having animals
Yes.
is such a great tool.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an animal, then you can also go to a local shelter and walk a dog and
Yes.
get the love, get
Yes.
the admiration. And they've got such, like, for the most part, most dogs, I don't know, cats as well, but like our animals are just pure love embodied, like
They are.
incarnate. And so if you need a hit, get an animal or just spend a little time with an animal, because they do have that total open-heartedness that's contagious. And scientifically, it's even shown that, when you gaze into a dog's eyes, I think a dog increased their oxytocin, I want to say 130%, and humans raised 400%, something like that.
That does not surprise me.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. So if you have a friend that has an animal, or you can get an animal, or go to your local shelter, and that, because you are not an imposter in front of that animal.
No,
period, right?
it's just the two of you. Yep, that's right. That's right.
Totally.
Yeah, and this brings me to making a distinction between self-doubt and imposter syndrome, because everyone's going to have butterflies when they're like attempting a new exam like GMAT. But how do you know that it's a severe case of imposter syndrome versus just plain old good self-doubt?
Right. I think if it's getting in the way of your everyday work, if you can't produce in the application process, right? If you can't produce an essay, if you cannot work on your resume, if all the things that you need to do to complete this process, you just can't even get started, and it's getting in the way of your everyday joy, this is something bigger. It's not just a little kind of nagging self-doubt. It's not a small thing. This is something that's, the more you ignore it and try to push it away, the worse it's going to get.
Imagine curiosity is also really important. Like, I know with my clients, I'll often say to them, be curious about the self-doubt. Like, isn't that interesting? I have self-doubt. What's at the base of that? How is that showing up for me? Like being a little chemist in one's, little laboratory, to explore it from a place of curiosity and not pushing yourself down.
Right. And is it real? Is what I've discovered in this curiosity moment. Is it real? Or is it just something I've made up?
Exactly. And, getting feedback from people that care about you, those champions, again, if you want to surround yourself with those folks. I'm curious too, and following up with with what we're talking about is, do you think that business schools and educators can create an environment that fosters more confidence and to help students tackle this more effectively? I mean, you said that the student
services.
Yeah, the student services have that. But what about in the classroom? Is this something that, or just in the environment that you that business schools and educators can work on this?
Yeah, I think that they can. I think having someone come in and have a conversation, maybe even during orientation, about some of the things that are going on from a mental health perspective, I think that would go a long way with students. I don't know, because a lot of these programs, they have a lot to fit in. And so what I would say to anyone who's listening is, once you get into school, if the programming you need isn't there, ask for it. So this again goes to, don't be an island, ask for what you need. And most of the time, these business schools are going to say, yeah, absolutely, that's a great idea. We see the need for this, or we've heard about the need for this, but we need a champion to do this. Do you want to help take it on? So I think business schools can be open to the voice of their students, and I know that they are. And students can say, this is what I need. Here's an idea. Do you think it could work? Do you think we could find, budget for it? And I think that that's the way, is to just be open and to realize that, we're in a really intense time in our history, and being open to having conversations about what that looks like and how that impacts us every day. I mean, we all just have to sort of be in this place of like, okay, what's next, and how can we support one another in this journey, and lift one another up. So absolutely. No concrete ways, but that's about all I've got.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think demonstrating the vulnerability is also a great feature of a leader, right? Like understanding what what is not working, looking out and asking for the support, and then being put in a position of like, well, hey, do you want to be part of the team to actually help make this better for everyone? Because you're not going to be the only person who's feeling that.
Right.
Like most of your classmates are going to feel this on their journey at some point. So
Yes.
it's great to get things in place.
Yeah.
Krithika, did you have any other questions, or Meg, is there any other last minute things that you want to share? We're headed towards the end of our time together.
Yeah, I just want to say, I just had like one teeny tiny observation, which is like everything starts from the awareness.
Yeah.
And knowing that, hey, something is probably not right, to the level. And I was thinking about self-doubt versus imposter syndrome. It's like, someone knowing that, yeah, like I can't jump from a plane, versus like someone like not ever being able to do it, or being so nauseous about it and so on, right? That way. So, but I liked what Meg said about it being something that comes in the way of everyday work and everyday life.
Right.
And that to me signals how it's not something separate, where you can think, oh, it's going to happen only in my professional sphere of life, but it's also going to be something that's affecting the rest of you and your life.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So, and that awareness is so important in all the things that we're doing, right? That awareness of, and it makes life more rich, right? It makes the whole journey so much more interesting, and you're not just coasting through, half asleep.
Right.
You're able to see what life is really about and what is showing up for you.
Yep.
Well, that's all we have for this episode. I want to thank our featured guest, Meg. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to put your email, your website up there.
Thank you.
And the insights were awesome. I know that this helped not only potential students who are going to business school, but other educators and potentially business schools, so that they've heard the message that, for them to be aware of their students and applicants. And I want to thank all our guests in our audience and MBA hopefuls. If you liked today's episode, please give us a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to MBA Waves to stay on top of all the latest trends and news in the world of MBAs, business, and education. And finally, don't forget to check us out next week, same time, same place. For full access of upcoming and past episodes, head over to MBAwaves.com. Thank you so much, and have a great week, everyone.
bye.
Bye.